contract. And
Mm-hmm.
really there's two really big words that get used when option contracts are in. A put, put
Yes.
option
Yes.
and, and a call option. So in normal terms, I guess when you're thinking of the word option, you tend to think of something that isn't compulsory. It's optional. It means that you can do something or not do something at your
Yes.
choice. Legally, when you have the word option on its own, that could mean it, but if you add a word to it, like a put option,
Yeah.
then it's an obligation for the
Ah.
vendor, for the owner to do something. If you say a call option, then it could be a option to buy, meaning a choice for the buyer. But
Ah.
if the owner sells a call option, they can't
Mm.
change the price later.
Right. So
In other
that's an
words, if
important
they've,
consideration, isn't it?
oh, absolutely. But maybe you want that.
Yeah.
The other side, the put option, is an obligation for the buyer to buy at that price or at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So put and call are almost opposites to each other.
Yes.
However, there are a few contracts, and again, speak to your solicitor about this,
Mm-hmm.
where on the same contract, you would put obligations on both sides. You could do a contract that your lawyer draws up that says you've got both a put and a call option, meaning one side is obliged to do something, the other side is obliged to do something.
Okay. Have you got examples of these in your real estate experience, Amir?
I do. Um, well, there's the interesting thing with the reason why people put down a call option or a put option is probably a better way to explain it.
Yes, please.
Quite often, and this really happened to me when I started with just $5,000 as a
Mm.
deposit.
Yeah.
When you're in a certain obligation, your bank or your lender will look at all your obligations and make an assessment to say, can you afford to be true to all the contracts you've already signed? So
Right.
think of it this way. Imagine you're running a theatrical show and the capacity of the room that your show is at might be 1,000 seats. But if you sell 1,001 tickets to a show that can only fit 1,000 people, then you've oversold it.
Mm.
A house is very similar, except you're looking at one person buying it. So you're not going to sell the same house twice
No.
because one of those people is going to miss out. So, in a very similar way, when you think about how much you have and how many times you can sell it, you might sell something. And if that first person who you've promised to sell it to
Mm.
pulls out or for a reason beyond their control,
Yes.
they can't follow through, then you have to close one door before you open the other door. That's kind of the simple way, Tony, of explaining what an option is,
Yes.
because you're promising to sell the house, but you haven't yet sold the house. So it's a future dated agreement where both sides have negotiated, or at least one side has negotiated and put it in writing and the other side agreed.
Mm.
Whether that's the selling party or the buying party, the obligations are real.
Yes.
So once you've signed a contract with one person, and then a day later or half an hour later, somebody knocks on your door and makes you an offer that's twice the price, it's too late.
It
You've
is.
already signed the obligation papers. That happens both ways. So that happens if you're an owner, you found somebody that's willing to buy your property and you sign that you let them, let's say you give them more time or you've negotiated on the price. They're really the two variables, aren't they? The
Yes.
price and the
The
time.
price and the time.
So if you've agreed to a time or you've agreed to a price, and then somebody goes to the next open house or rings your solicitor and says, a week ago we inspected the property, but we just didn't get around to finishing the offer, and now we have an offer for you, and that offer is more attractive,
You
either because they can
can't.
pay you faster or
Mm.
because they're offering a higher amount, it's too late. The person who now has the control of the pricing decision is the one that you've already agreed to.
Yeah.
So we can really muddy the waters here and complicate it because the third person can now negotiate with a second person who's negotiated with a first person. And you can see how risky that
Right.
is. If
Okay.
you don't have the paperwork written the right way, then one lawyer can get upset with another lawyer, and there can be costs, there can be reputational risk, there can be the risk of losing more than just money. You could be tied up with arguments for a long period of time for no reason, because really
Mm.
you have two people that are happy originally, and by deciding to make changes at the last minute, you're just throwing a fly in the ointment. So, yeah,
So,
it's
Amir,
very, very good,
in
but it's
in
very important that you do it properly with a legal representative.
yes. So, in simple terms, you could agree to buy property A at $300,000, but that you will buy it in 6 months' time at $300,000. That's the option that you've got on the table. However, someone might come along and go, "Oh, I really want that property and I'm willing to pay 450." They can negotiate with the person who has the first option, but they can't negotiate with the actual owner. Is that true to say? Or is it involving
Yeah,
the owner as
yeah,
well?
that's
Because the contract is between the first two people, and it's too bad if you've got 450,000 that you want to buy the property with. You've either got to wait out that 6 month time frame for the contract, or you've got to negotiate with the person who has the contract to buy in 6 months for 300,000. And that's doable, but it's just a bit more complicated, isn't it?
the lucky thing, Tony, is that in Australia the rules are very clear. So we
Ah,
have, of the six different states and two territories, the rules on options are going to be set out very clearly. So both your solicitor that has a license to act in your state or in your
yes.
territory, and also Dr. Google have quite often have quite good links to where the official government statement is that
Yes.
explains who, why, when, and why
Mm.
and what.
Yes.
So yeah, there are very, very clear rules on this. So if your paperwork that you've already signed and agreed on
Yeah.
says that the option is for a call option, for example,
Mm-hmm.
let's say that a person approaches you and they're the buyer, and
Yes.
the other person on the other side is the seller, and the buyer says, I'd like to have an option, a call option in 6 months' time at 300,000.
Mm.
Part part of the wording of the agreement might include the
Ability to
ability for
negotiate.
them anytime before the 6 month period is up to agree to start the contract. What
I
does that mean?
see.
That means 2 weeks into their 6 months, they can turn around and
And
say,
go,
you know what?
let's
Today I'm
do
going
that.
to exercise that option. So it's still going to be the 300,000,
Mm.
but the option they have is usually stapled to or attached to a purchase contract.
Mm-hmm.
So the option is the document that says
Mm-hmm.
what they're obliged to
To
do, what
do.
you're obliged to do, but that's quite often attached to the actual selling contract without a name
Mm.
on it.
Yeah.
So it might be, and again, check with your solicitor here, but
Yes.
it might be the paperwork for the sale of that house or that property with all the details listed of what they're actually buying, but not signed and not dated. The actual
Uh-huh.
contract is not signed or dated, but the option means that they have the right, but not the obligation to buy.
Mm. So if you were a savvy buyer and this was your particular circumstance, you could actually take up that option, purchase a property, and then immediately resell it to the person with the 450,000, thus making $150,000 profit without too much effort. Is that correct?
minus tax and minus
Oh, yes.
fees, etc. So
Yes, of course.
um,
Commissions and all that's involved in buying a property.
and there's a few extra steps because you bought it at an option. So if you buy at an
Ah.
option for 300,000 and you're selling it for 450, you have to own it first. So if you're selling it at a different price to what you bought it
Mm-hmm.
in New South Wales, you'll end up actually buying it, and then on the same day or the next day or 4 weeks later or 6 months later, you can sell it at a profit.
Mm.
There are some things you miss out on, which is why it's important to think about it from an accounting and a tax point of view as well. So if
Ah.
you were to live in that property for 12
12
months, 13
months?
months, just over a year, you might, depending on your tax situation, if you're an Australian resident and you're in New South Wales,
Mm.
you might get a few discounts on your taxes, on your duties, on your
Right.
obligations for that change. So that might give you, if this is the only house that you've bought, it might
Mm.
give you a 50% discount on your capital gains
Gains
tax.
tax.
It might give you zero capital gains tax. You might
Mm.
get a 50% discount on your land tax, or you might pay zero land tax.
Yes.
So there are a few things you need to check with your
Considerations. Yes.
accountant as well as your lawyer.
Yes.
But in an option, to put it very simply, if you were to buy something and sell it, you can sell it once it's yours.
Yes.
So you might negotiate with the person who's buying for 450 for them to help you pay the first part so that even if the bank wouldn't normally say yes to you,
Uh huh.
you might be able to, if you have another security, for example, you might be able to do something where the buyer or the ultimate buyer is paying your purchase, and then a week later they do a second purchase for the additional 150,000,
Yes.
or you might do a lot of things in between. The
Mm.
good thing about an option, because it's not an obligation, it's
Yes.
only the right to do something, is that you've already negotiated with the person who owns it on how much money they're going to get out of the deal.
Mm.
But when you have the option, it allows you to still communicate between your solicitor and their solicitor and suggest things that might work in both benefits. So
Yes.
let me think about. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the buyer.
Yes.
I'm trying to buy a house. It's $1 million house.
Mm.
My bank says that at the moment, the house that I'm living in hasn't been sold. It's advertised, but nobody's actually made me an offer yet that I've accepted.
Mm.
So when the bank tries to pre-approve me or to approve me to buy the $1 million house, they now think that I'm going to be holding two separate mortgages, the one for the existing house, the one for the new house. So the bank has two options. Either they say, okay, we can see that when the second house is bought, one of them will be rented out and the other one wouldn't.
Mm.
Or the bank might say, we're not happy having that much risk in the same suburb, so we'll only allow you to buy one house with your current circumstance. So first we'll wait for you to sell before you buy. Or they might say that they will only agree to it if you do a simultaneous on the same day swapsies. So I'm using a common term.
Ah.
That's not a legal
That's not a
term.
technical
Swapsies is
term. That's one we
technical term
understand.
is swapsies.
Yeah.
Um, so if the
Exchange
bank
contracts
says
on the same day.
if the bank says that we can settle both contracts on the same day, then you now have to get the person who's buying your house, the existing house, and the person who you're buying from, the seller, to both like the same date on the calendar. That might
Oh,
work, that might not
tricky.
work because people have to move house. They have to
Mm.
have their finances ready. They have to have their mortgage being ready to be discharged. So it's
Lots of moving
sometimes a lot trickier
parts.
than you think.
Yeah. Okay.
And you've got three different solicitors involved.
Yes.
So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But if it's not going to work for you, then either you miss out on the property you're buying, or you're missing out on the seller the buyer who wants to buy your house.
Uh huh.
So there's benefits to writing options and there's risks to writing options.
Mm.
But if I was to put myself into the shoes of the buyer, and I knew that I wanted to buy something, but I only wanted to have one mortgage at the end,
Yeah.
there's always a cost to doing an option. So if I was to approach the person selling and I'd say, okay, well, I'd like to buy your house, but I'm not fully committed to buying your house.
Uh huh.
I'm only I'm only asking you to give me the right to buy the house at the negotiated price, but I may just walk away.
Right.
The person who owns the house isn't going to like that. They're not just going to say, "Yeah, just that's all right. I'll sign my obligation.
Yes.
Do whatever you want to do."
Yeah, no.
It has to be practical.
Mm.
So the cost for it, yes, you have to pay your solicitor their fees to write the contract.
Yes,
The
because it's
other
a
side,
specialised
the
contract,
current
isn't it,
owner,
Amir?
and the current owner will have to pay their solicitor to read through and agree to it. Apart from those two fees, there's usually an extra amount of money that goes to the current owner
Ah.
to say, look, if you do this for me, I'll compensate you financially, and here's some money for you. And that's quite often called an option fee.
Uh huh. And
Why is it called a fee?
well, it is a
There's a
fee, isn't
reason
it?
why it's called a fee. So if it's a fee and the buyer walks away, then think about it from a taxation point of view. The owner, the person who owns the house at the moment, has made money, but it's not a rental income from that
Mm.
property.
Mm.
So if they've earned money, they would need to tell the tax agent that they earned money because the money wasn't a gift. It was actually a fee for a
And earn.
service,
Yeah.
right? So they've earned money on it. If that buyer has decided to commit and they've gone, right, now we want to go through, make this a formal contract. Now we have a beginning date. Let's start the 42-day or whatever's on the contract, a 35-day settlement. Let's start the countdown for it. There is a possibility for both lawyers to agree that the initial fee, the money you've paid for the owner to consider you, to convert that fee into part of the deposit.
Oh, that's not a bad idea, though, is it?
It's not. It means that the owner has successfully sold their property
Correct.
at the price that they agreed to. It also means that you haven't lost money on speculating, on guessing.
Mm. Yeah.
So it kind of works for both people as long as
Yes.
the contract terms were agreed correctly.
Yeah.
The the catch is, and this is the risk to the buyer,
Uh huh.
if you're paying somebody a fee for an option, in most cases you're going to tell them that they can keep the money whether you walk away or not, which means you're going to release that money to them as not a deposit that they have to hold until you decide, but quite often it means you're releasing that percentage to the owner and the owner can just run away.
Okay. Okay.
So what do I mean? What do I mean by run away? Well, they're not
Take your
going to
money and
relocate the
run.
house, right?
Yeah.
It's unlikely for them to get a truck and just relocate the house from Queensland to Victoria.
Yeah. Yeah.
But depending on how the contract is written and what your solicitor has agreed to do and what their solicitor has agreed to do, you can legally put your foot on the house, meaning that your name gets written into the
The owner.
government paperwork, the government's paperwork.
Mm.
And what that means is that if the owner ever decides to sell it to somebody other than you and you put your foot on it, they have
They
to first
can't.
pay you out
Uh
or to
huh.
get the agreement from you to sell it. And depending on the contract, that might mean they need to pay you out
Mm.
a certain amount of money, like 300,000 or maybe even more than what you bought it for.
Right.
Depends on the contract.
Yeah.
So there are ways for an option contract to be protected. And all those ways, Tony, come back to the beginning. Get a good
Yes.
lawyer.
Get.
Make sure everything is negotiated in very clear language that makes sense to your lawyer, and your
Yes.
lawyer has explained it to you.
Mm.
I mean, that makes sense in everything. If
Yeah.
you're buying something for $100 or $50 and you can afford to lose that money, it's not so much of a risk. If you're buying something for 100,000, 500,000, $1 million, or 50 million, it's a big risk. And so
Yeah.
you're going to pay your lawyer to do their due diligence and make sure that the wording suits you.
Definitely. Definitely. Okay, so that's a really comprehensive overview